the golden age of Hollywood. It's still painted in our minds like some enchanted realm, a place of flowing gowns, sparkling jewels, grand movie premieres, and legends who seemed almost superhuman living lives the rest of us could only envy from darkened theater seats. But beneath that glittering surface was a much harsher truth. Fame was often just a fragile mask that hid struggles so devastating they could ruin even the brightest of stars. Because for every golden Oscar clutched on stage, there were debts, betrayals, addictions, and heartbreak lurking backstage, waiting patiently to pull these icons back down to earth. Today, we're uncovering the haunting stories of Hollywood's biggest names who ended up broke, forgotten, or destroyed by the very dream they once embodied. From Judy Garland to Bela Lugosi, these are the cautionary tales hidden in Tinseltown's shimmering history. Judy Garland, a dream that turned to dust. Let's start with Judy Garland, whose story still breaks hearts decades later. When she twirled onto the screen as Dorothy in The Wizard of Oz, she was just 17, but her performance instantly etched itself into cinema history. That movie would play on TVs across the globe for generations, her voice on Somewhere Over the Rainbow practically becoming part of American DNA. By the peak of her career, Judy had earned what would be over $40 million today. She had mansions, jewels, fame. Yet at 47, she died with only $40,000 left and a crushing $4 million in debts. So how does a woman who once embodied hope and magic fall so far? The sad truth is that Judy was never allowed to be a normal young woman. MGM executives started giving her amphetamines to keep her thin and energetic as a teenager, the beginning of a lifelong addiction. Then came the alcohol to steady her nerves, and a parade of managers and financial advisors who were more interested in bleeding her dry. Her third husband, Sid Luft, was supposed to help turn things around. Instead, he sank large chunks of her money into shady business schemes. By the end, Judy was reduced to singing in modest London nightclubs, desperately trying to scrape together cash to keep the IRS at bay and to make sure her children could eat. One story says she had to sneak out the back door of a hotel to avoid a bill she couldn't pay, a far cry from the grand entrances she once made on Hollywood's biggest stages. And as tragic as Judy's downfall was, she was hardly the only screen legend to learn that fame could be a razor blade disguised as a diamond. Errol Flynn, the swashbuckler, sinks. Errol Flynn was the man every boy in the 1930s wanted to grow up to be. With his effortless charm, devil-may-care grin, and sword in hand, Flynn brought heroes like Robin Hood to life in a way that felt larger than anything Hollywood had produced before. At his height, he made millions, living a whirlwind life of yachts on sparkling Mediterranean waters, palatial homes, and champagne flowing like rivers. But Flynn's story is also a glaring lesson in how quickly it can all vanish. He spent money as fast as he earned it, sometimes faster. There were rumors of extravagant parties where guests would walk across rugs sprinkled with glittering diamonds for fun. Whether that's exaggerated or not, the legend alone tells you something about how Flynn's lifestyle was perceived. His troubles only deepened with a sensational 1943 trial. Flynn was charged with statutory rape accusations that grabbed every newspaper headline. Though he was ultimately acquitted, the legal costs nearly gutted him. His reputation never fully recovered. By the time his second wife walked away with a generous divorce settlement, Flynn's accounts were already bleeding. In later years, he was often found drinking heavily, his once athletic frame swollen and sick. He took roles in cheap, forgettable movies just to keep afloat. When he died at 50, his estate was valued at a meager $10,000, barely enough to cover funeral expenses, let alone the opulent life he once flaunted. Barbara Payton, the starlet who lost everything. If you ever needed proof that Hollywood could chew people up and spit them out, Barbara Payton's story stands as grim evidence. In the early 1950s, Barbara was magnetic with a face that promised box office gold. Critics raved about her in Kiss Tomorrow Goodbye, alongside James Cagney, predicting she'd become one of the decade's biggest stars. But Barbara had a taste for thrills. She partied with gangsters, dated men who used her fame for their own ends, and found herself on the front pages more for scandal than success. Soon, the offers from studios slowed, then stopped entirely. Arrests for writing bad checks and public drunkenness turned her once promising career into tabloid fodder. By her late 30s, Barbara was haunting the seedier streets of Hollywood, literally working as a prostitute to afford food and a dingy place to sleep. Former co-stars barely recognized her when they passed her by. When she died at just 39, from heart and liver failure brought on by years of alcohol and drug abuse, her family couldn't even afford a proper burial. They had her cremated quietly, a tragic, lonely end for a woman who once seemed destined for stardom. Fatty Arbuckle, a silent star, silenced. Roscoe Fatty Arbuckle was, for a moment, the biggest star on earth. In the roaring 1920s, he earned more than $1 million per year, the kind of money that could buy entire neighborhoods. He lived in a mansion with 22 rooms and threw parties that became legendary jazz bands, fountains flowing with alcohol, and walls that were said to be literally lined with dollar bills as a joke. But in 1921, Arbuckle was accused of raping and accidentally killing actress Virginia Rappe. The press went into a frenzy. Though he was acquitted after 3 trials, his reputation was shredded. Studios cut ties, audiences turned away. He spent nearly $700,000 defending himself, a staggering sum that nearly wiped him out. Trying to make a comeback, he worked under a false name, but the roles were few and forgettable. Arbuckle died of a heart attack at just 46, leaving behind debts and a tarnished name. His story is a reminder of just how quickly Hollywood can switch from kissing your feet to stepping on your throat. Dorothy Dandridge breaking barriers, then broken by them. Dorothy Dandridge's smile could light up a theater. Her performance in Carmen Jones made her the first African-American woman ever nominated for a Best Actress Oscar, smashing one of Hollywood's most glaring color lines. But offstage, the industry's racism was relentless. Roles dried up because studios didn't know what to do with a black leading lady. They wanted maids, not megastars. Financial advisors mismanaged what she did earn. Bad investments gobbled up the rest, and multiple failed marriages drained her emotionally and financially. By 1963, Dorothy was forced to declare bankruptcy. She owed roughly $150,000, most of it to the IRS, who weren't exactly known for their patience. She died just 2 years later at 42, alone in a modest apartment, with only 24 cents in her bank account. The official cause was an accidental overdose of antidepressants. But in many ways, it felt like the final act in a tragedy that Hollywood itself had written, a cascade of tragedies. So many, so similar. And it didn't stop with just a few unlucky stars. The list of broken legends goes on and on. Marie Prevost, once a darling of silent cinema, couldn't survive the jump to talkies. She spiraled into depression, drank heavily, and by 38 was dead of malnutrition and acute alcoholism, with just $300 left to her name. Sammy Davis Jr., one of the world's greatest entertainers, was still $5 million in debt when he died. The IRS seized his homes, jewelry, anything they could find to claw back unpaid taxes. Veronica Lake, with her iconic peekaboo hairstyle, filed for bankruptcy in 1951. By the 60s, she was waiting tables in a New York hotel just to survive, dying alone from hepatitis and acute kidney injury. Bud Abbott, of Abbott and Costello fame, had his home seized by the IRS. He ended up living in a cramped apartment, making tearful pleas on television for fans to help him financially. John Garfield, who brought a gritty, realistic edge to acting, was blacklisted in the Red Scare. Unable to find work and under immense stress, he died of a heart attack at just 39, never seeing his reputation restored in his lifetime. Their stories echo the same chilling refrain: fame and fortune can vanish with frightening speed, leaving only shadows behind. Buster Keaton and Mabel Normand, not broke, but still broken. Not every fallen star ended utterly destitute, but many still lost everything that had once made them legends. Buster Keaton, known for his stone face and daring stunts, faced the cruelest twist. Studios loved his work but hated his independence. MGM stripped him of creative control, pushing him into roles that stifled his genius. The Great Depression hit his investments hard. An ugly divorce cost him dearly. Alcohol dulled the pain, but also his reputation. By the end, he was doing minor television appearances and small movie parts. While he avoided total poverty, his wealth was a fraction of what it had been, and he lived simply until he died of lung cancer at 70. Then there was Mabel Normand, a comedic dynamo who helped define silent film alongside Charlie Chaplin. Her association with the still unsolved murder of her friend, director William Desmond Taylor, destroyed her career even though she was never charged. Stricken with tuberculosis, Mabel spent everything on treatments. When she died at just 37, it wasn't in a glamorous Beverly Hills mansion, but a quiet sanitarium, a tragic coda to a life once filled with laughter and spotlight. Bela Lugosi, horror, royalty in horror poverty. Finally, we come to Bela Lugosi, the actor who gave Dracula his eternal face. His chilling stare and hypnotic voice practically defined horror, but they also trapped him. Directors couldn't see past the cape and fangs. Struggling with chronic sciatica, Bela turned to morphine and methadone for relief, falling into an addiction that further dimmed his career prospects. By 1955, he was bankrupt, listing debts of just $3,500, but having almost nothing in the bank. When Bela died of a heart attack in 1956, he left behind $1,900 in cash and a few battered personal items. Frank Sinatra, of all people, stepped in to pay for his funeral, an odd kindness that underlined just how empty Lugosi's coffers had become. Conclusion. So the next time you catch a glimpse of a vintage movie poster or watch an old clip of a dazzling Hollywood premiere, remember, many of the people who smiled for those cameras were hiding battles that money and fame couldn't fix. They chased dreams that sometimes became nightmares, paid fortunes for fleeting moments of glory, and found themselves abandoned when the lights finally went out. Maybe that's the darkest lesson from the golden age of Hollywood, that sometimes the spotlight shines so brightly it burns everything it touches, leaving behind only cold ashes where stars once stood.